Welcome to the 864 podcast. I'm Mike.
And I'm Randall.
And we are your hosts. On the 864 podcast, we have people on our show that are doing phenomenal work in the community. And the hope is to encourage you guys to do the same in your communities, but also just to see how God is working and moving through their lives. Today, we have Daniel with us, and he is the director at Fair Play Boys Camp. And it's very good to have you on, Daniel.
Good to be here.
Good. So a lot of people in this area are familiar with Fair Play Boys Camp, so it's something that's fairly common. But for those of our listeners that aren't familiar with it, just give us a small blip about Fair Play Boys Camp.
Sure. Yeah, so Fair Play Camp it's a residential home for boys. It's in a wilderness setting. So we use the wilderness setting as a way to create an environment where boys learn to trust each other. So we're taking boys that have had lots of different things that have happened to them, and helping them learn how to take responsibility. So a lot of the groups live by two rules. They say everything we do together as a group, and we do it in a good attitude. And so when we're in a good attitude, we can have lots of fun. When we're fussing at each other and not in a good attitude, we can actually be quite miserable. Yeah. But we're going to find a way to go from miserable to happy before we go to bed, before we finish the day, before we move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so, most people that know me, I guess, know I would have worked under Daniel for a while. So I'm excited to have you on. You're somebody I really respect and look up to. Good friend of my father's and role model for me in a lot of ways. Why don't you just tell us what a normal week looks like for you, what your job as director kind of entails? I know that's kind of a lot, but...
Yeah, so normal. I'm not sure what normal is, and I had made myself a few notes off of your questions. But so kind of a normal week would be, my kind of normal hours would be Monday through Friday. Mm-hmm. Pretty much kind of, starts at breakfast, kind of 8 to 5. But I'm obviously on call all the time. So that can be Saturday or Sunday or some evening, that kind of thing. Mondays is usually my day where I'm coming into Chuck Wagon, which is the dining hall where boys eat their meals. And it's kind of, I'm catching up. There's a lot that's happened over the weekend with the groups and boys and their counselors. And so just kind of feeling out what's the spirit of camp feel like, what, if there's a group struggling, or giving some directions to the supervisors, different issues that may have come up over the weekend. Tuesdays is a big staffing day, so I drink lots of coffee on Tuesday. But it's a day to kind of pull our team together. So I meet in the morning with the educational coordinators first, and we're talking about just the educational parts of camp and how that all plays in, and different areas that we want to target with a boy. And then I meet with the program director, and we meet with the family worker team. And that team works directly with the boys and their families. And so that meeting is talking about new referrals, talking about families that they've gone and done an in-home interview in. And then our wait list right now is about 6 months. Wow. So we're talking about, how to take care of the families that are waiting, that are kind of in this crisis mode of like, we really need some help, but we have to wait for this place that we feel like is the right fit for our son. And then also talking about the boys that are at camp right then, and talking about things the families are concerned about, issues maybe the family is facing, and also just how does that tie in with what's happening with the boys in their groups. Then at 1:15, I lead a staff meeting that is all the available staff. So it's kind of my one time in a week to get the staff in one room. Yeah. Just we spend some time praying. We spend time, again, if we're planning something, then we'll cover details there. And in the afternoon, we do a staffing with all the supervisors, the family workers, educational team. And that meeting then would be kind of taking all the different parts of the therapy part of camp and kind of wrapping it together and going, okay, here's what a family's saying, here's what a boy needs to work on. We need to, work on both sides. So yeah, it's a lot of, you do a lot of sitting, but it's also a day that's energizing because it's a hard work, but we have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot in staffing too. We get to tell lots of stories, and so I always feel like it's a successful day if you've had some fun, you've spent some time praying, you've spent some time strategizing. But you leave kind of going, okay, here's our focus. Let's keep going.
Yeah. About how many staff are at camp right now?
I think we have 34 staff total.
Okay.
Between what I call program staff, which are directly connected to boys and families, and then also our thrift store staff.
Okay. Cool.
And then Wednesdays and Thursdays are a bit more, that's when the boys are cooking in their campsite. And so that's kind of my office days when I can kind of catch up on some stuff. And then Fridays, it's kind of, again, setting the tone for the weekend because, again, there's a lot that happens, over the weekend, and then kind of wrapping up the week.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of my role my role has lots of different aspects in it. Part of my role is kind of the administrative side of camp. And so leading an organization, kind of similar to leading a business. It's leading people. So sometimes it's actually kind of hard to say at the end of the day, here's what I did. But kind of maintaining that professional side of childcare. And then the other side of my role is the ministry side and kind of keeping a balance between those two. I often say, if you don't do the professional side well, then you lose your opportunity to do ministry. Right?
That's good.
But if you don't keep your focus on ministry, there's a lot of easier ways to do childcare than a wilderness camp. And so,
and you probably have kind of an especially tough balance with when it comes to taking care of somebody's kid.
That's right.
24/7 for like 6 weeks at a time. You definitely need to maintain both of those.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And that, like, I can imagine having someone that's leading the organization, a lot of the weight and responsibility of like the liability issues and like the working with DSS, working with childcare, like all that stuff, like a lot of that probably falls on you, but because of that, it probably opens up other people to dive in more and like not have to worry about this as much. So
so part of my role would be to kind of protect the frontline staff from that administrative type stuff to where they can focus more on just the relational parts.
Yeah. So like, how are you guys, like as far as staff goes, is it all like, it's all volunteer, right? And then like how far out do you have people coming? Like,
so again, there's kind of two sides. I said we have one part of our staff team is what I call short-term staff.
Okay.
And so those are staff that are serving like a VS term. So chiefs are serving a 2-year term.
Okay.
Cooks are a 1.5 years.
Okay.
Thrift store staff for like 15 months.
Okay.
So those staff are obviously young people moving in from a different community, excited about, plugging in, making a difference. And then there's what I call the long-term staff, which are, say, people that have been a counselor or a chief, come back as a supervisor, your family workers. So those staff would be staff that are usually married, have their own house, live in the community. So kind of, two sides to that team. Recruiting, obviously you got, chiefs, there's usually 4 chiefs a year. So you kind of got to stay ahead of that. And you're always trying to get, thrift store staff and other staff that want to come in and plug in.
I kind of like, that it fascinates me. Like as a director of another youth, like a ministry, like hearing the side of it, like staffing and recruiting and all that. And also something we like to do with this like podcast is when someone has like worked in something, anything that they have that would be helpful to someone else that might be either in that position or maybe want to be in that position at some point. So like, what are some things that, I don't think this is on the list, but I just came up with it. But what are some things that you like have kind of learned over your time as director that have helped like recruiting people and like getting people excited about what you have going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a lot of it is just building a relationship with them, right? And, I'm now recruiting people that, like, I was in the youth group with their parents, right? So that puts me in kind of this old category. So a lot of it's just making connections. Everybody wants to make a difference. And so there's kind of, our main ministry at camp obviously is boys and their families, right? But there's kind of this whole other side ministry that happens with the young people that come through, right? Where you come through and you become a leader and you grow and you develop. And so helping young people be passionate about those types of things too. And there's lots and lots of opportunities out there. So you get a couple chances to kind of be like, hey, I think God might be calling you to do this, right? And it's okay if they don't. You put energy into it, and the ones who feel called, you want them to feel called to, but you don't want them to feel like, hey, if you don't come, then you're not following the Lord, right? But yeah, it's just, you have to just stay connected.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
So you should tell us on that note kind of what brought you to camp. Camp is what brought you to the area, correct?
That's right.
So you should just kind of tell the story of like how you ended up at camp and then somehow wound up in the director's seat.
Yeah, that's a good story. I was just talking at church on Sunday, and I said, I really didn't have much choice. I feel like God used a really hard thing in my life to bring me to camp. I was engaged to a girl and was going to get married, and then her and my sister were both killed in a car accident. And so that was back in beginning of 1999. So I feel like looking back, God used that to develop this passion for helping people. And so it was about a year and 9 months after the accident happened that I knew that I needed to do something. And through some mutual friends that were connected to camp, I got a phone call, and like the ones I make now, right?
Yep.
And they said, hey, we think you would do a good job as a chief. And I said, well, maybe. And so I came down, I spent a weekend with the group, and the explorers gave me some turkey feathers and some rocks and stole my heart and never gave it back, right? But for me, camp was a journey of healing, kind of all of my own. And I found kind of this new purpose in helping people find purpose in healing out of their pain. And so it's been a long journey of just of that process. Again, like I say that faith is believing forward what only makes sense in reverse. And so looking back and being able to look at the opportunities where God has used that hard thing to give me an opportunity to be able to feel what this other person is feeling. So that's been really cool. So I was a group chief for 2 years. I left camp, and I had met Faith down here. She worked at the thrift store. So we got married in April of 2003, and then we were asked to come back to be a supervisor in the fall of 2003. So we committed to 2 years then. And I've just never found a way to leave.
So you've been here ever since then?
I've been here. This year is actually my 20th consecutive year. Wow. So that's crazy.
And that's at camp, not just in the area.
20 years at camp.
Wow.
So what were your roles then in that 20 years?
So I started as a supervisor. I was a supervisor for about 4.5 years.
Okay.
And then I was the program director for about another 4.5 to 5 years. And then at that time, the director, Judd Schrock was the director, and he started talking about leaving camp. And so the board asked me if I would be willing to go to school to get at least a 2-year degree to fit the licensing requirement to be the director. And so I did that. I was an online student at TFC.
Nice.
And worked at our thrift store and was our thrift store director for about 2 years.
Okay.
And did a bunch of work in there. So I've really kind of worked in every different role at camp. And then, in June of 2014, I became the director and stayed there.
I didn't even know that you were here like the entire time from the time you were supervisor all the way up until director, and that's cool. And especially how they had you in all different roles, and I mean that's important. I think to like as a director to see every part of it, whether it's you're the chief supervisor, whether even the thrift store staff, like you kind of have a little bit of an idea of what they're going through, and even like Faith, like being involved at the thrift store too, that's probably super helpful. I want to like just talking about you and Faith, and then also like your family.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do they play into like your role as director?
Yeah. So it's working at a ministry is obviously different than working, say, a normal business job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of balancing family and ministry and all that. I've tried to keep them involved as much as I can, right? Faith obviously doesn't do any day-to-day work at camp, but does a lot of behind-the-scenes kind of stuff. She's a pretty amazing woman. Yeah. Feel pretty fortunate to be married to her. But, she does a lot of, coaching and mentoring ladies that are, single ladies that are at camp. And for my kids, I've always tried to keep them somehow connected to camp, so that I've always said I don't want my kids to be bitter or resent camp. Because, my kids sacrifice a lot to be at camp. And so finding ways to keep them involved, again, because a group may call you and say, hey, we need some help tonight. You're going to drop what you're doing and you're going to go do it, right? And so helping them have some relationship with those boys, although it's, surface relationship, but if it's more than just some boy who's causing a problem down there that's taking their dad away, then that helps kind of personalize it and gives them a heart for it too. And again, because we've lived apart from we've not lived close to either one of our parents or our families, because Faith's family's in Ohio, mine's in Indiana. But then looking for ways that they can be plugged into the staff team. So they have lots of kind of surrogate aunts and uncles that have done a great job. Like Randall and my daughter Annalise share a birthday.
Yep.
Nice. And so that's really cool. Like Randall picked her up one day in his Jeep and took her out for ice cream on her birthday.
Oh, that's cool.
So, you just find ways like that, and the staff have done a great job with those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I was I'd say you're doing fairly well with the I don't think Max hates camp at this point. I was just hanging out with him last night, and one thing for me at camp, just having some families around like yours is always, there's something stabilizing to that when most of the single staff are going to be disconnected from their own families. And sometimes there is a peace that comes from being able to go into a home, whether perfect or not, I guess. There's something grounding about that can just, I don't know, it's just good for
sometimes you just need a mama, right?
Yeah,
like your mama's way somewhere else, and you just need to go sit at someone else's table and just hang out.
Let go of the responsibility a little bit. But no, that's been really really fun for me to see. Boys are growing up, coming into the youth group, and it's been fun to watch you guys through that journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. It kind of made me think. I think it's cool when like you as a father, like if they see the excitement and the passion in you, it can often reflect down to the kids. Like even we were like when we had Harley Yoder was on, and he talked a lot about like his dad and his grandpa, and like seeing that in them, and then also like you were talking about the sacrifices that your kids have to make because of camp. But like when they kind of get on board with that idea and like you kind of bring them into it, it's not as much of a sacrifice, but it's just like they actually want to do it. And it made me think of that too, like how Floyd did that for Harley, and like kind of like he was very obvious about why he was doing stuff, and so it kind of got Harley, like Harley didn't have bitterness towards that, like he was on board with it because he understood it. And I think that like what you're saying about bringing your kids in with you is like, instead of just being like, all right, I got to go to work and like, I got to like leave, like actually bringing them into it. And like, I got to go take care of so-and-so out on the trail and he needs my help. So I think that's cool. And I think it can be scary, like for people that are like a part of ministry to bring your family into it, I think. And it can be intimidating, especially like depending on who you're working with. Like if you're working with teens that like might have a troubled past, like it can be intimidating bringing your family into that. But I think like if we let God lead with that and trust him with that, I think it's cool to see a family involved like that. So
Yeah. Well, I would have also said it was good for my boys to see a family.
that's true.
Some of them obviously come from stable environments, but others just don't. And they used to mention that, like, I don't know that they would have said it directly or anything, but you could tell they had deeper respect even for who you were. And when you said something to them, when they see that your boys listen to you and know how to act when they're there for supper.
Well, it's also a good opportunity. Like, again, my family's far from perfect, right?
Yeah.
But we can have fun together and we can do life together, right? It's a really neat way for us to just be a witness for Christ, even in that way, right?
Yeah.
And I think it also gives you an opportunity then to help boys go, hey, you know what? Like, you could grow up and be that kind of a dad. Like, did you see that staff? You watch that supervisor take care of his family. Like, you could grow up and be a dad like that.
Yep.
Even maybe you haven't had a dad in your life, but if you could do that, then you can help them see what a life could be like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. This next question is very loaded, and I mean, you probably have like a million answers to this, but it's always interesting to like just to hear a gut reaction to it. Like what has been the hardest part about camp, and then on the flip side, what's been the most rewarding?
Yeah, that's I thought about that question a little bit when you texted it to me. There's lots of hard, right? But there's lots of good too. I would say probably if I had to kind of put it together in a kind of a nice little answer, I would say probably the hardest part of camp has been the relationships, right? Because again, when you start working with troubled teens, they're going to call you some bad names sometimes, and they're going to push away at you, and what they want from you is what they push away from you too, right? And when you're dealing with people all the time, someone told me one time, he said, if you're going to work with people, then accept the fact that where there's people, there's problems. So don't spend all your time trying to get yourself to a place where there's no more problems. Just accept the fact that there's always going to be problems, and then deal with them. And you can, obviously, you want to create a community and a sense of, you want to create a culture where it's not a problem culture, right?
Yeah.
But to not panic when things get a little tough sometimes, either with your staff or with the boys or with a family or with a state official or something like that. But to just go, okay, Lord, let's see what we can do with this. So that's probably the hardest part. Like sometimes it's pressure from licensing, sometimes it's pressure from maybe it's fundraising, maybe it's staff recruiting. But then on the flip side, like probably the most rewarding part to that too is just all the relationships, right? Like I had a cool opportunity this summer where there was a kid who lived in the group with me. His name was Daniel, actually. And he came back, and, he's like, when you're a group chief and you have a guy in the group, like he seems like this little kid to you, right? Yeah. He's only he's in his upper 30s, right? So he's like a grown man, has a family, right? And so I got to walk down trail with him. We got to sit at the Frontiersman Logs again and just kind of laugh and reminisce and all that. Or I'll be walking into Lowe's or somewhere like that, and someone goes, Chief Daniel. That's awesome. That's a graduated camper, right? Yeah. That's someone that knows you from camp because nobody else calls you that. And to just go, hey, I'm doing good, right? And they're telling you about their family and the things that they're doing. So, probably the hardest part is also the best part. And I think, too, the other payoff, too, has been in the rewarding part is just to see young people, like to see young men come through and then just wrestle with some of the hard things in their own life, but to leave camp as people with some good leadership skills, people that have wrestled with hard things and are ready to go back in their community and use the tools that they learned here. So that's really rewarding to me too, is to see those guys go back, and because then the ripple of what you're doing is so much bigger. Because to me, camp is it's a unique ministry, but the ripple of it can be so much bigger. And it's just one simple way to build the kingdom of God. But if you can help young men become leaders, they can go back to their communities and do that same thing. You can help the ladies that come through. then it just goes everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to quick go back. It made me think again. When I think of something, I just want to talk about it a little bit. When you were talking about the instead of trying to like make sure there aren't any problems, instead just like be ready to face the problems. It was cool. Like it was probably 2 years ago now. It was right when I was about to take over as director, and I was a little bit like, I'm not qualified for this. Like, this is not something that I'm ready for. And it like for me, a lot of like I want to make sure things are running smoothly. Like I want to make sure we can get through things without problems, and like we want to do everything to prevent that. But then I was actually Paul Graber talked to me, and he's like, you know what? I heard something really good, and I want to share it with you. He's like, instead of going into a situation trying to prepare yourself for all the outcomes and like all the problems that are going to come up, and like preparing yourself for everything that you think is going to happen, instead dig into your relationship with Christ and dig into like what he has for you, and make sure where you're at with God is where you want it to be. And he's like, if that's who you're seeking, then when those problems come up, you have someone to go to with them. And I think like that's completely blew my mind. I was like, that's so much easier than trying to look ahead and figure out all your problems. Instead, just make sure like the guy who you want by your side is there, and make sure that relationship is in check. So that way, when things do come up, you have someone to lean on.
Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
So that stuck with me a lot, and it made me think of it when you were saying like, instead of trying to prevent all the problems, just be ready when they do come to just handle them well. And
that's, I if you'd have told me when I was a kid that I was going to be the director of an organization like camp, I was like, that was totally not me. Like, I was not a very confident kid, and still can second guess myself and critique myself a lot. But yeah, just to kind of go, it's okay. I don't have to have it all together. But believe in who I am in Christ, and believe in the fact that it's what God has called you to do. And then rest in that and do it.
Well, and that's a good word for anybody, whether they're going to become the director of camp or like even in your family or in your church. I feel like it's Bonhoeffer that he wrote a lot. He started like a community when he saw kind of the writing on the wall of the Nazi takeover in Germany. They started a community where they basically tried to separate from the world and become like a group. He has a lot of interesting writing that came out of it, but one thing that he said that's always kind of stuck with me is the people who became most disillusioned with the church movement they were trying to start are those who valued their ideal church above the people around them. And so they were always looking for the they had this idea of what a community could look like, and probably that problem-free community. And when that didn't happen, they turned bitter towards everybody around them instead of accepting the fact that we as people have our flaws and we're going to deal with them. I think that's something that you see a lot of former camp staff taking into their communities, something really valuable that people learn there. And it's just the other thing that I have always appreciated about you, especially when I was at camp, is you seem to do a pretty good job maintaining the energy level at camp, and the group spirit, if you will. And I would be kind of curious, like, what are some things you do in that leadership position that keeps energy among the staff that works in the office around you, and then from there, those working directly with the boys and staff elsewhere?
Yeah, I think, I don't actually know what all I do, but I think there's a couple key
That's probably good.
key parts to that, right? Like, again, I didn't start camp, right? So when you look at it, say from a business perspective, I'm like a third generation leader, right? Not the first generation. And so I think one of the things that I feel pretty passionate about is that, we have to pass down principles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy. I think churches do this. Like, it's easy to try to pass down traditions because traditions are easier to control than to try to pass down principles.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think that's something that has helped just to go, like, maybe the way we live it out today is different than the way it was lived out 25 years ago or 30 years ago. Yeah. But the principle can be the same, right? Yeah, it's still relationship. It's still, and in a Christian, in our Christian faith, like, the way I live my faith out is different than the way my dad did. And, that's true for you guys, obviously. Mm-hmm. And yet, in the way my children are going to live their faith out is going to be slightly different. But that faith should still be a faith in Christ. Yeah. It should still be love your neighbor, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? Yeah. And so finding ways that bring energy and allow staff to try something, even if it's different, as long as it doesn't change the core of your mission, the core of good. Like what you're doing. So allowing staff to do that, being able to think outside the box, and to not, I think for me, it's been not having to focus so much on preservation and just like live it in the moment, be okay if it looks a little bit different. Yeah. You're always going to have a few critics, but as stay true to principle. And I think that's true, like I said, in our faith as well.
Yeah. It's interesting because most of the people we've interviewed so far, I would say, are the ones that would have started the ministry they're in. I'm not really thinking of anybody that's in that position. It's kind of a unique position to be in. There's probably some added pressure if you're willing to put it on yourself, I guess. But
I think something along with that too that is helpful is if to help the staff appreciate what the people that worked at camp before us did. Like JD talked about, when they put in water lines, they dug them by hand because they couldn't afford a trencher, right? We don't have that problem today. Yeah. God has blessed us with the finances, right? That doesn't mean that what we're going through today isn't hard, right? That doesn't mean that what that chief is struggling with today, to him, that's just as hard as having to dig a water line by hand, right? And so validating that and being okay with him feeling that way, and yet helping them appreciate what we've been given, and also to find ways to be good stewards of it. Because I feel like God expects us to be good stewards of those types of things. And for me, I feel like my little time at camp, I need to be a good steward of it. And I often tell staff too, like, the relationships that we build while we're here, those relationships, people may, like, we have donors that give to camp that I don't have any relationship with. It was people that were at camp before I was at camp that built that relationship. And those people still believe in camp because of those people. That should be true of us once we're gone.
Yeah, it's interesting because even these ideas of like how you take care of what you have now and what you do, and then appreciating what came before you. I like everything that you're talking about sounds like just a slightly bigger version of what happens in a group down trail. It's interesting how like I think my perspective on life has been shaped a lot by the time there and how I think about leadership and accountability through like supervisors when somebody's out in the field somewhere. Some of that, there's a lot of good structure at camp, but I also I really like that heart that's at the center, that we're not going to force everything to be exactly the same. There's some things that we're going to do because it's the right way to do things, but then just being able to have the wisdom to parse out what where we can get a little more creative and keep some life there. I like that.
Yeah, I like I think, and that everything you're saying, I think can apply to like any ministry you think of, and also in like what you said to church as well. Like that's why I like digging into all this stuff, because I think like you can take it and apply it so much stuff. And like I really like what you're saying about like passing on principle and not tradition. And I think like sometimes when like if in your shoes, the easiest thing for you would probably just to be like like we're just going to do everything the same, like the way it
Mhm.
has been done, just so that if anything goes wrong, it's like, oh, this isn't my thing. Like, this is just how we
Right.
do it.
That's right.
But like you being bold and being like we're going to take those principles, but let's grow, and like we can change, and we can try things. And I think that takes courage, and that's a good note for anyone. Like, if you're like, make sure your principles are solid, and make sure like you're still like, you want to stay in line with obviously the fundamentals of faith and all that, but don't be afraid to think outside the box and to think more, and not just like rely on everything behind you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to be a student of what you're doing too, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to understand, kind of like, for me, I have to understand kind of the landscape of childcare.
Yeah.
I have to understand the laws and the things that are changing, and even
that's
the way
true.
people think about family and the way people think about raising children.
Yeah.
And, there's an old saying that says, you don't want to be building wagon wheels when the cars are coming out, right?
Right.
But so you have to, again, find ways to keep those principles, but make them current and relevant in today's culture, and be able to communicate it in a way that others, say your licensing people, can go, okay, that actually is really cool. Like, that makes sense. And so, I think that's something that I personally try to do, is kind of be a student of what I'm doing, and always be willing to learn, and to kind of look out and go, if I would do this training, or if I, maybe this angle or whatever, so that it stays relevant.
That's good.
Yeah. I guess we can move on to our last question, since we're here anyway. We ask this of everybody that comes on. It's always interesting to hear people's perspectives on both the question and their answer. But what is one thing the world needs more of, and why?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
The world needs lots more Jesus.
You can give your Sunday school answer, or your
right,
whatever you would.
So that, that's kind of the general. But I think probably what I would say to that is, we need men that are willing to step up and be leaders. And I tell kids, I tell my boys, like, you may not grow up and be a leader of an organization, you may not lead a church, you may not lead a business, but if God created you to be a man, then you're a leader. And you're going to be a leader in some sense. You're going to lead your family, you're going to lead your marriage, and God may ask you to lead a church. He may ask you to lead a ministry, right? But that starts by you being faithful in first leading yourself in your relationship with Him. But, I see the effects of men not being leaders all the time. It's in the boys that I live with, right? So I think just a call to men to step up, and not in a over-the-top kind of way, but in a true way that God created you to just, be a leader, embrace that. Whether lots of men say, well, I'm not really a leader. But I say, if you're a man, then you're a leader in some sense. And I think that's important. I think if we could do that, then we would take care of our ladies, and we could change the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. Especially tying it in directly to what you feel the aftermath of bad leadership, or just not leading, is a lot of the kids that you see, and is because of leadership or lack thereof. So. Yeah, I completely agree. I think we were just even talking I do a Bible study with some guys about, and just talking about how men, like, even nowadays, are so quick to just shove everything off on other people and try to avoid responsibility and leadership. And whether it's small things or whether it's like a big thing, it just taking the moments and making the decisions, like, I'm going to lead, I'm going to step up and take charge. And I think, if there was a culture with more men that did that, it would look a lot better. So,
and it's something that has to be taught too.
That's right.
I think a lot of the boys there, it's not always because they've just been making terrible choices. I mean, they do. That comes later, but just that, I don't know. You can tell that they haven't had a lot of good modeled sometimes, and it's amazing what happens when they get just a little bit of a glimpse of that, who they can become from there.
Well, everybody wants to make a difference,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everybody wants to do something. Every man wants to do something that they're going to be remembered by.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are more naturally a leader. But if I can learn to be a leader, then I'd say anybody can.
Yeah.
Good. Well, yeah, that was great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on and answering our questions, even though not all the questions were on the list.
That's all right.
Thanks for shooting from the hip for us.
Yeah.
That's what I like to do a lot. I like to ask questions from the hip as we're thinking about them, because if we have the questions, some of our listeners will have the questions too. So, I really enjoyed it, and I want to encourage you to keep on going, because you're inspiring people, and I was really encouraged by this. I know, Randall, you already have been blessed and encouraged by Daniel, so I think a lot of people enjoy this. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing with us.
My privilege. I appreciate the opportunity, and
and go check out Fair Play Boys Camp, and if you ever want something to do, it's a great place to be. So
that's right.
Randall can tell you from experience, and Daniel can tell you from experience.
That's right.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. Sweet. Alex?
Like and subscribe.